Hello, you are listening to Karma, Destiny and Choice, and today we will be taking up the subject of dealing with rejection. Dealing with rejection. And it is my pleasure to be interviewing Sister Denise from the Brahma Kumaris. Hello, it's great to have you back.
Hello Magla, thank you.
There are very few people who are naturally equipped to deal with rejection. What makes this particular malady worse is because it need not be communicated by way of an action or word, but rather by an inaction or the lack of words. Let us hear your wisdom on this aspect.
I'm thinking about someone whose profession is to be a writer or journalist, because in newspaper journalism there is a saying, you are as good as your last story. If your story is accepted, you get a byline, you're good. And then you write another story, which is probably just as good, but it doesn't get selected, you're no good. And I think that this is partly because people identify with what they do. A child is always asked, what would you like to be when you grow up? And the child can never say, excuse me, I already am. I will still be when I grow up. What question are you truly asking? And the question is, how do you want to earn your living? What activity do you want to do for which you can get remuneration to handle your expenses? But people classify that as the identity. This is really the problem. In intimate relationships, if somebody demonstrates that they love you, they need you, they want you, they're talking to you, you are the center of the universe, you're accepted. And if they happen to take the phone call and talk to somebody else, you take that as a rejection. And this is again part of what we were talking in an earlier episode about not really developing emotionally as a child, and you get stuck in this very early child state where your ego is all tied up with getting adulation, because unless other people think you're wonderful, it means they think you're horrible and they reject you. So this is the arrogance of the stuck child who's traumatized in early childhood. And because so many people have this problem, I think it's an indicator that child rearing practices are mostly traumatic, and that needs to be relooked at. People deeply believe that if you speak nicely to somebody, it'll spoil them. If you praise somebody for what good work they've done, you're going to damage them, you're going to make them egotistical. And this blind faith needs to be challenged. It's very important for people to get positive feedback, which is encouraging. It doesn't spoil them at all. It lets them know that they're on the right track, and they're encouraged to continue. It's a good thing. Because of this way of growing up, people become very needy and emotionally very weak, and they don't realize that their existence doesn't depend on somebody being right there. There are other ways in which rejection happens, where somebody just stops all communication without any explanation, and then the person is rejected, they don't know why. One of the problems is that people do not really know how to express that they feel rejected when somebody behaved with them a certain way that they think is a good way, that the rejected person is supposed to not feel rejected about, but they do feel rejected about. So they don't express it, they act on it, but they feel that it's wrong to feel rejected, so they handle that problem by not saying anything. And they think that makes it go away. It doesn't. So I think it's very important to challenge the morality, because this comes back to this, what I call toxic conventional morality, which has come up with this idea that if I reject you, it's good for you. And so I'm going to reject you because that's my love for you. People have got it so upside down and backwards that it's just unreal, but this is how it works. And this is because of this idea that if you're good to people, it'll damage them. Actually, if you're bad to people, it damages them. If you're good to people, it doesn't damage them. If you pamper people, it's not good. But being good to people and pampering people is different. Maybe people are so gross and unable to distinguish and differentiate between these different ways of being with people that it's either black or white. No, there's a big piece of grey in between. One of the impacts of spiritual practice is the development of a sense of self-honour. And that means to say you really, really think about your identity. In terms of priorities, you put yourself first, God second, and everybody else third. If you do what is conventionally supposed to be done, you put everybody else first and you forget totally about God and yourself. This is considered good and unselfish, but in fact it's not very smart. When you are focused on your self-honor and you make it clear to yourself that I am a pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful being of light, and I am absolutely fine as that, then come into action through the body and interaction. You will be able to process the reality that if somebody rejects you, it's their problem.
It's a lot of work to get there.
This is the work, and if you get there, you're invincible. Because people control others by telling them, oh, you're no good. Because the person will take that on and say, oh, wow, these great people think I'm no good, therefore I must be no good. It's a setup to give away your power. If you are good to people, it allows them to develop their own power. But if you damage people from the get-go, you can manipulate them and control them and eliminate the competition, because life is a competition. And if you can keep all the competition off the field, you're more likely to win with less capacity.
When an individual feels rejected, I think it's many experience that to be soul destroying. That's the expression that's used. There are obviously those listening to you right now who have had it happen to them in the past, not currently, not in future, but in the past. Now they're sitting with this feeling of worthlessness, of what did I do to deserve this, of why does my own mother, father, significant other not want me? There must be something wrong with me. I think that's the worst feeling, to be left with the feeling that there's something essentially wrong with you. That's why you were dumped.
This happens very much to people who are called highly sensitive people. And there is a category, highly sensitive people. I believe it's supposed to be about 1% of the population, which is a pretty large number of people, because you feel everything very intensely. And when you're growing up, somebody will casually, without paying attention to your feelings and egotistically say something harsh to you, which is a form of rejection, and they think that they're being normal.
Or making a joke.
Yes. The consequences of their action is very devastating on that sensitive person. This is why I'm saying that you need to build up your sense of self-honor, because then your sense of self is nothing to do with public opinion. Because anybody who's not you is the public.
Oof. Oh. Bumper sticker. Say that again.
Your sense of self-worth has nothing to do with public opinion.
Why then are so many of us willing to buy into a lie about ourselves when we feel rejected? And Sister Denise, I'm thinking of individuals who were rejected pre-verbally by their own parents, or suffered as children, or suffered as an adult, various stages in one's life. We don't readily consider that that's on the shoulders of the rejecter. It doesn't make a statement about me. 99% of us buy into the belief, which lasts for life, humiliatingly for life. There's something wrong with me. That's why this was done to me. They become a victim.
And this is because prevailing social attitudes, toxic conventional morality stimulates abusive parenting practices as a culture, so that as many very young people as possible start out in life with low self-esteem because of these abusive parenting practices based on the erroneous moral principles which are rooted in the interpretation of the religion. Then you can control the people. That's basically the idea behind it. If people feel bad about themselves, they become victims. I mean, in India, this was done systematically by somebody by the name of Macaulay, who got horrified when the British colonial people started to adopt Indian dress and Indian ways. He developed this culture that unless we can make these people feel ashamed about themselves, we cannot conquer them. And so systematically a process of propaganda was initiated, and the toxic conventional morality is toxic because it applies the same principle. And we have to expose it and challenge it and take it out. Otherwise, we're complicit. If you know something and you don't say something, you're condoning it, you're complicit. But it's so difficult for people to see it because it's all around, and because people believe that it's correct and true.
With the feeling of rejection, there is a mental element attached to it, but also feelings. The feeling of guilt, the feeling of intense shame, the feeling of being exposed. Tell us how one deals with those feelings once they're already there in you.
Feelings occur in the mind, and they arrive in the mind through sense perception. You feel that way because of outside people's behavior. They look at you, speak to you, interact with you in that way. They give you that message. And as a child, you always internalize messages unfiltered. Growing up means you filter the messages and you take in what you want to take in and you leave out what you don't want. But people who are traumatized in early childhood, they never get that filter, and they continue to take in this abuse until well into their adult life, and then they give it back to the next generation. So the problem with this kind of abusive behavior is it's passed on generation after generation after generation, and it becomes the culture. So it becomes institutionalized abuse. And this is why it's much more difficult to challenge, because people say, well, it's always been like that. It hasn't, but they think it has because they forgot when and how it got initiated. The spiritual practice is a very good antidote to that, because you have to sit with yourself and think that I am a pure, peaceful, powerful, blissful, loveful being of light. And how I know that is because that's how God looks at me. Then you have to choose the way God looks at me and the way these humans look at me. Which one is more reliable? Definitely, if you have any idea about the reality of God, you would say, if I have to choose, I will choose God's perspective on me rather than these other people who are half blind and don't know anything. The problem with that is that instead of being part of the abusive group of people, you distance yourself, and they will make you pay for that. So you have to make yourself strong enough to take that step. It's a slow process. Gradually you build yourself up to a point where you are so sure about yourself that if you position yourself in such a way that other people will try to penalize you for being in your self-respect and self-honor, that you don't take it in. And you just say to them, in your mind at least, enjoy your karma. You don't like me, you think I'm no good. It's not my problem. I know I'm good. It's your problem.
Yeah, that takes a lot of courage and obviously a lot of personal growth.
But this is what spiritual practice is about, growing to a point that you can take care of yourself around that type of behavior.
You know, Denise, the image of a moat comes to mind, crocodile-infested moat. Somebody who is growing spiritually is like an individual standing on an island surrounded by a crocodile-infested moat. So if one is getting negative messages from all around one, the only way to survive is self-investment.
It's all to do with setting limits and boundaries. This crocodile-infested moat is like you put yourself in a prison because, okay, nobody can come in, but you also can't go out.
Yeah.
So that's not very good. There are different kinds of boundaries, and what you need to set is healthy boundaries. Initially, when you have been subjected to these type of parenting practices, where you get traumatized at an early age, you have no boundaries. Anyone can come, and so you have to do something urgent. You're in survival. So you put a moat with crocodiles. That means you've got you're totally closed boundaries. No way in, no way out. There's one kind of boundary where you have a boundary, but there's a door.
A drawbridge.
At least.
Yeah.
And but the handle for that door is on the outside. So while you have some protection, anyone who really wants to can get in. So it's not quite good enough. You need to have a boundary with a door with a handle on the inside. That's healthy boundaries. And so spiritual development also includes the psychological work of establishing healthy boundaries.
That's such a lovely term, and it brings the mind back to what you spoke of in earlier episodes of attachment and enmeshment. Enmeshment then would be a situation where there's no boundary between myself and somebody whom I love.
Exactly, and you don't know where you finish and the other one person begins. So you give away your power.
I think what I like most about what you shared today is that one can use a intensively negative experience like rejection as a reason to rise. I'd like to know, you get individuals who have the same experience over and over and over again. You have the scenario where a young boy is rejected by his mum or dad, which is how children commonly feel, very commonly feel, when parents are divorcing. Then that child experiences the same thing from perhaps a teacher, and then later on in life from a friend, and later on in life by a spouse. Why is it that people have the same negative experience, the same type of experience again and again and again? And this could be rejection. Some people's history is filled with betrayal. Where is the lesson there if it's not just one episode of rejection, but again and again and again by different people, and the common denominator is me, myself, and I?
Well, no, the common denominator is you're very weak in a particular area because of your initial wound, and you haven't healed from it yet. So every time it comes around again, it's an opportunity to work through it to the point of getting healed from it, but you don't. So you need 1 time, 2 time, 3 time, And as this happens, you grow. It starts at age 5, then it happens at 15, then at 25, then at 35, 45, 55. Sooner or later, you have to say, there's something that I need to do. There's a message here, and I need to pick up the message. And the thing is, this message, which is a really painful message, every time it comes, it's much more painful. So you're in this exponentially intensifying painful situation until the pain is bad enough for you to say that the pain of looking at the problem is less than the pain of not looking at the problem. Because you don't look at it because it's too painful to look at it.
Oh, I've heard this expression once, when the pot becomes full. That's what you mean.
Yes, you will only really do what you have to do when it becomes less painful to do it than to not do it. And that has to be a pretty high dose of pain, and where none of your drugs work, because you always use drugs of some sort to handle this.
What you just said is one very deep secret. Say it again.
The pain of doing what you have to do to get free is less than the pain of not doing it, because the pain of doing what you have to do is big, so you avoid it. But then the balance of pain becomes greater to not do anything. Then you're able to do something. And the drugs that people use are manipulation. So the person who is really pained by rejection will manage all of their significant relationships by disempowering those people and putting them in a situation where it's too dangerous for them to reject the person. They will find some way to kind of bribe them and control them through shaming or some sort of kidnapping procedure. At some point, their manipulative processes won't work, and then all of a sudden, they're very vulnerable. So they would be very afraid that that person can reject them, because they're not bound by the manipulation. That person is very vulnerable because their drug didn't work. That means they're close to a point where they have to do the work that they needed to do all along to get free from their wound. So it's very positive while being excruciatingly painful and terrifying. Because that little child who got stuck, that highly sensitive person who got wounded in childhood, has to eventually grow up and become a normal human while being very sensitive, all the various qualities and so on, but they need to heal from that wound.
A very interesting conversation. So fascinating to listen to you, as always. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rejection. There are scarcely a few of us who have not had this traumatic experience, and from the mind of a senior yogi, we have received some extremely valid and pragmatic solutions as to how to deal with it. And I think the most important message that Sister Denise has shared today is the situation of rejection comes into my life so that I could learn how to grow. That is spiritually very empowering. I do hope that you are able to find some resonance in what was shared today, and I do hope that you could use it to improve the quality of your life. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you back soon. Take care. Goodbye.